Welcome to a fresh new hour of CBS Sports HQ. I'm Haley Sutton. When it comes to rivalry week, throw everything out the window. In one of the more volatile weekends in college football, not only did we see upsets, we saw powerhouses fall. And now, just hours before the penultimate college football playoff bracket reveal, our Jerry Palm has some predictions ahead of championship weekend in college football. Two of the biggest talking points will be Miami and Alabama. The two teams have been in the conversation all season, but some questionable losses in 2024. Our Jerry Palm has the Canes at number 11 facing the 6th-seeded Notre Dame, with the winner meeting SMU in the following round. But no sign of the Crimson Tide or Kalen DeBoer's first season in charge. That is a couple of more teams that we're going to get into in that mix. But as I mentioned it, the college football playoff rankings coming tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. A lot of decisions to be made for the committee as we approach that time. Now, we saw some fights across the weekend, but none more fierce than the rivalry we're bringing to you right now here on CBS Sports HQ. We've got our college football rivals, Danny Kanell and Josh Pate. Gentlemen, let's start at the top here. A very interesting talking point between the two of you. We got three teams from the SEC currently projected by our Jerry Palm in the field. I know we've got an SEC advocate and an SEC hater in this conversation. So let's bring in our voice of the Crimson Tide. Josh Pate. Fair or not, three SEC teams according to our Jerry Palm?
I'm just a spokesman for common sense, Haley. You read the prompter wrong there. I think, I was doing radio with Kanell early this morning, and I said, hey, this is a pretty nuanced answer for me. If you told me you can do it the way you think it should be done, I'd actually lean South Carolina. If we do it the way I think the committee will do it, it would be Alabama. But what's ironic is I'm looking at Jerry Palm's projections there. I'm looking at, all these shows on in the morning. I'm looking at Mario Cristobal plastered all over the place. And it looks like Danny, there may be a little more traction for Miami than I thought there'd be. It's really interesting when you look at the odds market, too, because Miami this morning shifted to having the second best odds out of those three teams to make the playoff. But as for the SEC teams there, it's just funny to me how Alabama considered the fairly overwhelming favorite to make it out of the three. And then it's South Carolina fairly far behind. And Ole Miss is like over the cliff down at the riverbed. And I think they're fairly competitive. I think the resumes are fairly competitive. When we're chopping up 9 and 3 teams, you will never hear the words "and it's not close" come out of my mouth. So probably a slight lean Alabama. I'm not convicted on any of this because, like I said, when there's 3 losses in the mix, no one has a rock solid argument.
Yeah, with these 3 teams, it's like just cover your eyes and throw a dart at the dartboard, really. I mean, and it feels like maybe that's what the committee's going to do. And maybe going with Miami avoids this whole debate by, just saying we don't have to pick one if we don't have to do any of them. We'll just go ahead with Miami and we'll avoid that whole conversation. I think I totally agree with you on this one. Like, if it was fun and I wanted a fun team to root for that has been hot as blazes right now, I would go with South Carolina, right? They've been on fire. Lenore Sellers has been somebody you can gravitate behind. Shane Beamer's a really likable coach. He's fun. And you got Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart coming off the edge on a ferocious defense. But the problem is their resume doesn't stack up to anybody's. And just because they're hot now, like you said, it's not the way we're supposed to do it. You're supposed to look at resumes, who stacks up as the best teams in college football. And I'll tell you something, Josh, I think Ole Miss is getting the shaft here. I do. Like, if you look at their resume based on everything that they've looked at, I think they're the more complete team. I think their losses, yes, the loss to Kentucky was bad, but it was only by 3 points, and they were driving with a chance in the fourth quarter. And then their loss against some of their other losses weren't that bad either. On the road at LSU, another game came down to the wire by a field goal, losing at Florida to one of the hotter teams late in the season. I know it feels bad because Florida was finished as 7-5, but that's a team that was playing differently at the end. And most importantly, Ole Miss holds that win, which is a dominant win over Georgia. So of all these, I don't know. Like, if I was in the committee room, I would be bringing up all these points and kind of trying to see what people valued. If you went back to the criteria, I think Ole Miss might have a pretty strong case. But I like South Carolina. I think Bama, there's probably Bama fatigue. But in all of them, I think maybe the best answer is none of them.
Yeah, I want to just reiterate, when I was doing the A-B there, when I said I think they'll go Bama over South Carolina and I'd go South Carolina over Bama, that's just assuming the odds market is right and Ole Miss is out. Because if it came down to the 3, I'm slam dunk Ole Miss. As much as I just said there's no clear answer, it's fairly clear to me. I think they're the best team out of those three. I'm not sure where the gulf in the resume conversation apparently comes. I know we got to get really analytical to understand that. But to take you back 1 point on South Carolina. So you say the resume is not there. I think a lot of people would agree with that. You've got to put the best teams in. Okay, but if we really quickly go back to last year when they decided to hit the manual override button with FSU because they said Jordan Travis is gone and we think he's the straw that stirs the drink for Florida State. So we're manually overriding. We're putting Alabama in over FSU. They took it upon themselves to assume the value of a player. Well, I wonder with South Carolina's resume, look at the LSU game. They got hosed by the officials, but forget that for a second. Lenore Sellers got knocked out of that game and South Carolina's up, and then they lose a very close game. That committee could reasonably take it upon themselves with the same protocol to say, if Sellers finishes that game, we think they win. We think they're a two-loss team. We put them in. Now, maybe that's not the way it should work, but if we're going off precedent that's already been set by that committee, that wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world to see to me.
Agreed. They're allowed to do that. It is in their criteria, which is why if I'm Kenny Dillingham, and you know this probably better than anybody, I am pounding the table that they're one of their losses was without Sam Leavitt entirely for the whole game against Cincinnati on the road, which was still a close loss. So they should be essentially higher ranked than Boise State. Now we'll see if he campaigns, if they win the Big 12, he starts pitching that. But I think they're another team that had quarterback issues that impacted their loss column. So we'll see what the committee does. But yes, you are right. I know very well about the precedent set last year.
Well, we're going to kind of get into the ACC, Danny, because even though last year was a mess, it kind of feels like this year's ACC is almost more of a mess, especially when you look at Miami. They are coming off of that loss to Syracuse. Kind of feels like they have a Mario Cristobal problem there. But just in terms of the ACC, and Danny, I'll come to you first here. What do we expect out of them in the CFP? Because you've got SMU on one side who has looked every bit of a champion going into their first year in the ACC. You've got a Clemson team coming off of that South Carolina loss. Just how do you stack everybody and make up for maybe what they missed out on last year?
Well, I remember when Clemson lost early in the afternoon to South Carolina, it was like devastating. There goes your chance. It felt like kind of a play-in game, and maybe it was for Clemson and not South Carolina. But then all of a sudden you see Fran Brown after a win against Miami saying, hey, Clemson, we got your back. We got you back in. It does feel like now Clemson's only chance to get in is with the win in the ACC title game. But what does that do with SMU? I know Jim Phillips, the commissioner of the ACC, was on SiriusXM campaigning saying, hey, there is no way you can penalize SMU if they do lose to Clemson by kicking them out. And I would agree, where they stand now at 8 or 9 is squarely in the playoff conversation. So why do we penalize them? Meanwhile, you'd have Tennessee, Indiana, Notre Dame be able to sit at home with their feet kicked up on the couch watching all these teams subject themselves to a pounding, and you would penalize SMU? It makes no sense. So I do think potentially the best case, especially if Jerry Palm is right, for 3 teams in the college football playoff would be a Clemson win over SMU. SMU stays in, Clemson's in, and Miami's in. That's 3. That is a best case, I think, far-fetched scenario. I think the far more likelihood is that 2 ACC teams get in.
It could be 3 or 1, though, is what it could be. It could be that if they find it in themselves to punish an SMU for losing a conference title game, if they think that little of the ACC and they just hit the trapdoor button and they fall out, well, to me, it also means they're not going to be in the mood to vault Miami up. Like, I think it's a 3 or 1 almost. But to go back to the point Jim Phillips was making and you're making, I mean, it may pain me, but at this point, I got to agree with you. Given the circumstances and how they've changed nationally, you cannot, or at least you're not going to find me pounding the table here saying so-and-so from the SEC with 2 losses belongs in over the ACC championship loser, because that's not the argument anymore. The argument is a 3rd loss on all these resumes, and the argument at that point is just a bunch of pretty good teams. And at that point, I'm not punishing someone. In fact, I don't believe in punishing you, period, if you're in the top 12 going into conference championship weekend for losing your conference championship game. And not only is SMU there, they're in the top 10. Like, they're squarely in the mix right now. And it would be the most blatant example yet, not just of conference bias, Danny, but it would be brand bias. Because I think SMU would be struggling more from that pony logo on their helmet than it would be the ACC sticker on the back. Because I don't think the committee would do this to a Miami or a Clemson if they were in a similar position.
And which is why I do think if they lose, right, they're favored in the ACC championship game against Clemson. But if they lose, I think it's similar to, remember the conversations we had about Indiana versus Ohio State? Better keep it close. Like, I will say that for SMU. Like, if you get boat raced, if you get beat by 3 touchdowns or more, I am significantly worried about you. But if you keep it within 10, if it's single digits, if it's competitive, I think they're safe. But again, it goes back. Indiana, not a traditional brand. SMU, not a traditional brand. Unfortunately, there's a different standard. So I do think it has to be a close game for SMU to advance with a loss.
Our Jerry Palm currently has Miami as the 11 seed taking on Notre Dame in the projections there for the college football playoff. The winner of that would then advance to take on SMU. So to your point there's some ACC hope. We'll see just how far it gets in. But I want to switch over and talk about the Big Ten, gentlemen. And you know, when we talk about the Big Ten, we got to talk about Ohio State. And after what happened this weekend, their 4th consecutive loss to Michigan. They entered last week at number 2, and then they lose again. When it comes to Jerry, he has them seated at 8. But Josh, from your perspective, an Ohio State team that has a loss to Oregon, a very close loss to Oregon, and then this performance against Michigan over the weekend, do you keep them in? Do you keep them out? How are you approaching the Buckeyes in the college football playoff?
Well, they're certainly in. I mean, I think it's been really popular, rightfully so, to criticize Ohio State over the last week. But if we're comparing their resume to every other team in the country, you see that win there over Penn State. That win over a top 3 team on the road is a really, really big deal. Huge deal. And also, I think that I am not a believer that a win is a win and a loss is a loss. Case in point, that game at Oregon. If they go up there, Danny, and they get splattered all over Eugene, that's one thing. They went up there and played one of the better games we've seen any team play all year. It just so happened they caught Oregon's fastball. But to hang within 1 point of Oregon playing at the highest level we've seen them play all year in Eugene, I was there. It was an insanely, incredibly loud environment. I think they're actually getting credit for that. I believe in that, by the way. When we're talking about resume comparison, you should be punished for the loss, but they were punished a little bit for the loss. It's like Penn State when they lost to Ohio State. They were punished, but just a little bit because of how much the committee valued their opponent. So, yeah, I think they're in there. I just think it's really interesting, the whole dynamic of losing the Michigan game. Just you're gutted. Emotionally, your fan base is selling on you, and it feels like the season's over. And then you remind yourself, oh, not only are we going to the playoff, we could have a home game in the playoff. So we got to get the guys right back in the building. We got to check back in like nothing happened. What kind of attitude do they play with? That, to me, is the more fascinating part.
Yeah, I totally agree. How do you bounce back emotionally from that? And you saw the devastation on Ryan Day's face. We heard the aftermath of that game, and now the criticism's coming. His job's on the line, and it feels like this Ohio State team almost has to win a national championship or at least get there to save Ryan Day's job. But I will say this, all the way back in 2014 when they won the national championship behind the 3-quarterback system, including our own Cardell Jones, who finished the job, there was an ugly loss that season. It was the beginning of the year to Virginia Tech, but they were able to bounce back and rally. This team could do the same. And I'm with you. I think the only question is not if Ohio State advances, it's how much are they penalized with that loss to Michigan. Do they have to go on the road, potentially in the SEC somewhere? But I would wait and see how things shake out, because this could be a blessing in disguise. I know we've talked so much about the importance of seeding and it's confusing, but they might have an easier path than had they been in the Big Ten championship game, potentially won it. We'll have to see what their path looks like. But I still think they're more than capable, talent-wise, of winning the national championship. It's emotionally, mentally, where are they? And they better rebound quickly if they want to get this thing done.
Yeah, not a lot of time to process what we saw after the game this weekend. It was a mess. Our Jerry Palm does have them projected to play Tennessee, and the winner of that one would face Oregon in the following round. So that's those conferences. But let's get into the Big 12, because, guys, what a finish it's been. The Utah Utes were the team that were expected to win the conference, and they got just 2 Big 12 wins. Meanwhile, Arizona State in that 4-way tie at the top in terms of the record, so they'll face Iowa State in the championship game with a chance to get to the CFP. So exciting stuff when it comes to the Sun Devils and just the Big 12 in general. But the bigger question here, gentlemen, is should the Big 12 champion get a higher seed than Boise State, who is currently holding on to that final spot in the top 4? You both are in agreement that the Big 12 should get that spot over Boise State. Josh, I'll come to you first here. Why do you believe in the Big 12, maybe more than over Boise State?
It's just a matter of principle, of strength of schedule. We're talking about different calibers of football being played. And we're not even talking about the Mountain West compared to the Big Ten or Mountain West compared to the SEC. That would be a no-brainer. But I think even if we look top to bottom at the quality of competition that the Big 12 plays, that Iowa State has played, or that Arizona State plays, I don't care, either one of them wins it, I would put them in. And I would also say, if Boise goes and beats UNLV, I'll tip my cap all day to him. It's not a matter of disrespect. It's a matter of logic and common sense of understanding strength of schedule. But if you don't do it, and if you do give them the first round bye, I don't think we can overstate enough how enraged that would make some real powerful people at the Power 4 or maybe, dare I say, Power 2 conference table. And I think they have enough stroke to fundamentally alter the way this thing works a couple of years down the road if they see an outcome as perceptionally egregious as Boise not only making the playoff but getting a first round bye.
Yeah, and the thing that stinks about this conversation, Pate, is you and I think both have been big proponents of Group of 5 football. I've, as somebody who recognized 2017 co-national champion UCF, like I firmly believe they should get a chance to play, but giving them this much of an advantage is just not right. I mean, you're right. Brett Yormark would lose his mind, the commissioner of the Big 12. And when your fourth best team is Fresno State at 6-6, your fifth best team is New Mexico at 5-7, and I haven't even gone down the next 10 list of teams, it's just not the same. Not to mention it's a different level of play. There's a reason why they're called the Group of 5 and there's the Power 4. It's a different level, resources, the types of players. It's just a different level. I love that they're going to get a seat at the table. I just don't think they should be given one of the heads of the table, which is what they would. And that's one thing I'm watching for, Pate. Will the committee leapfrog Arizona State? Will they value that Big 12 championship, or Iowa State, as I assume a little bit too much? Will they leapfrog one of those teams over Boise State and fix this? Or will this be potentially that situation that will have a lot of people outraged?
To both of your points, because I feel like this is the conversation that we also had with Indiana as the year went on, when they were undefeated and their strength of schedule was coming into play. When it comes to Boise State, they lost to Oregon, the #1 team in the country, the team that has spent the most time at #1, by 3 points. So, Josh, I'll come back to you first here, and I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. That one loss is, I guess, heavier, or the Big 12 championship weighs heavier than this one loss for Oregon State, and that's the logic for putting them in higher than the Big 12 championship?
Yeah, it's a total sliding scale. I want us to keep this graphic up for a second because I want you to look at that week 2. You go to Oregon and you lose by 3. That's actually a really high caliber performance from you. So Ohio State did that same thing. The difference is you look elsewhere on this schedule, Ohio State didn't have Portland State, Utah State, Hawaii, and San Diego State lined up. They had to go to Penn State. Like they had Indiana, a top 5 Indiana coming in a little bit later. Even playing a Michigan team that's down this year, Michigan's got 2 top 10 draft picks on their defensive line. Like you're playing a higher caliber of athlete. And so you do not get the benefit of the doubt. I do not strictly believe you are what your record says you are in college football. I think it's one of the biggest lies that we tell. There's got to be a fundamental understanding of strength of schedule, and whether you want to call it fortunate or not. Like, I'm someone who believes the G5 should have their own playoffs. So I don't care about people's opinions about whether it's fortunate or unfortunate. If you get a shot against Oregon, you got to go beat them. And if you don't, the rest of your strength of schedule is not going to measure up to where you get benefit of the doubt and you get a seat at the bye table in the first round of the playoff.
You know who's probably going to solve all of this for the committee? Barry Odom and UNLV, who go to the Smurf turf, and watch out because they had their hands full in Las Vegas. This is a rematch of that game. That will settle all this dispute. But I agree with everything you said. We're on the same page on this one, and it'll be fascinating to see how it unfolds if Boise State does win it.
It'll be crazy, gentlemen. Either way, someone's going to be upset. It doesn't matter what conference you're coming from, but that's what makes it fun, and that's what makes it college football. We certainly appreciate the time, guys. Thanks for hopping on HQ with us. The college football playoff bracket coming your way tonight at 7 o'clock Eastern. Regardless of the rankings, we know where Penn State and Oregon will be come Saturday. They'll be facing off in the Big Ten championship game on CBS. Oregon, the third FBS team in the past 50 years to start 12-0 in its first season in the conference. Can they cap it off with a title, or will Penn State finally get one?